So, as you know, the Supreme Court today is hearing oral arguments on mifepristone case. It's one of the drugs that can induce an abortion. What does this mean for us here, where abortion is still legal?
Well, obviously, we'll see how the arguments go and what the court decides. But I'll say this. Access to mifepristone is critical. It's why I, in the wake of the Dobbs decision, made a decision to stockpile mifepristone here. We have mifepristone on supply. It will continue to be available in this state. But I think what we are seeing is just a continued attack by state legislatures and by the Supreme Court on reproductive freedom. And this is terrible. It's terrible for women. It's worse for women who are poor, low income, and women of color. And the threat right now to reproductive freedom is very real, and we see that on display right now in hearings before the Supreme Court. There's the issue of reproductive freedom, which is incredibly important. There's also the issue in this case about science and the role of the FDA. Massachusetts, we're the global hub for life sciences. So decisions by the Supreme Court on the prerogative of the FDA, for example, also potentially undermine our ability to be the leader that we are in Massachusetts when it comes to life sciences and the work that is done. So it's a terrible situation. We are going to continue to make sure that in Massachusetts, I as governor will do everything to protect patients, to protect providers. We've seen an increase in the numbers of people traveling to Massachusetts for abortion care, as we've seen state by state take that access away. We are going to continue to do everything we can to protect patients, to protect providers, protect access to MIFI, and protect reproductive freedom. It's also the case and a reason why Massachusetts was just voted the #1 state to live in if you're a woman, because these are the very kinds of protections and rights and access that we provide, along with child care and pay equity and so many other things.
You know, I know you say we'll do everything to protect. You said that after the Dobbs decision, too, and I'm sure you mean it. But if there's an anti-choice decision from the Supreme Court on mifepristone, my understanding is it covers us as well. And I know you've stockpiled whatever it is, 15,000 doses, but at some point they run out. So if the Supreme Court goes rogue yet again on reproductive freedom, we're in bad shape here, too.
Well, we'll have to see what the Supreme Court does, but certainly it puts at risk access to mifepristone and would force
here as well, just to be clear.
It does put us at risk here as well, and this is why it's so important that the Supreme Court rule the right way, and why I will exhaust every single avenue and opportunity to make sure that people have access to mifepristone, access to abortion. But the reality in the unfortunate, most unfortunate situation we are in is that this threat is real. We see it every single day. It's also why November and the election matters, because this is a Supreme Court that was designed and constructed by Donald Trump. And people need to remember that as we face the next 6 months.
You know, one last thing. I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, I know I speak for Margery. Our view is that the majority of this court is in the tank to Donald Trump. When they decide something will help him, like overruling the Colorado decision about disqualification, they speed it. When there's something that's unlikely to help them, like the immunity thing, they don't even schedule oral argument until April 22nd. Do you share that perspective?
I do. It's well, in the tank, I mean, I would hope that these justices do their job and fulfill their constitutional obligation and be true to the oath that they swore to uphold, right? I mean, that is my hope. But it's certainly been the case that we've seen case after case where there have been real issues with what the Supreme Court has decided. This is the court that took away and overturned precedent, Roe versus Wade, after so many years. And that was just the start of further evisceration and attempts to undermine women's rights in this country. And so we as states, it really matters in our states what we're doing, how we're leading, how we're protecting our residents, in this case, how we're protecting women, how we're protecting access to health care. And that's why I've said from the beginning that I'll do everything that I can. And I think that we have as a state, and we are going to continue to protect patients and providers.
One last question before we get to the calls. We all saw the video of the horrible collapse of that bridge in Baltimore, and I'm hoping that it was aberrational because obviously the ship hit it. But we also know, we read every year about how many substandard bridges we have in our own state. What's your reaction to what happened, and how concerned should we be here?
It's absolutely devastating and heartbreaking. I was actually supposed to be meeting with Governor Moore this morning, and he had to fly back in the middle of the night to attend to this. And I've been in touch with him. I've offered our support as a state to Maryland and to Baltimore. My thoughts are with all of the victims and survivors, all those affected by this tragedy. Huge kudos to the first responders, men and women who are in the water right now and in the air looking for survivors in what is becoming a recovery effort at this point. There are a few things that I will note. Number one, we continue to inspect our bridges here in Massachusetts. The Tobin was inspected, for example, as recently as a couple of months ago. Number two, Massachusetts does not have the same kind of cargo traffic that they have through the Port of Baltimore. We used to, but in recent years that has changed, and much of it is happening with cargo coming into Massachusetts, but not having to pass under bridges. Number three, it's important that we be proactive here, and when I leave you, I will be returning to my office where I'm convening with the Coast Guard, MassDOT, which is DOT, Department of Transportation, Massport, as well as Mass Maritime, which we're really lucky to have Mass Maritime here in Massachusetts. Many of the men and women who operate those ships and do that work were trained at Mass Maritime, and so we'll have the benefit of speaking and hearing from the Admiral as well. But I want to make sure that we're having a conversation to make sure that all of our protocols are where they need to be, and that we are doing everything that we can to ensure the safety of our ports and our bridges.
So voice of...
Our number is 877-301-8970. The governor is going to be with us till a little bit before noontime. You can call her or text her at that number. That is, of course, Maura Healey. We're speaking with Jerome from Dorchester. You're on with the governor. Hi.
Hey, Jerome.
Hi, Governor. I'm with XR Boston, and I have a question about climate. You recently appointed a youth climate council, and you're going to be appearing at their Earth Day event. I was wondering if you plan on implementing any of the recommendations that they put forth.
I'm so excited about our Youth Council on Climate. As you know, this is a space we've been really active in, appointing the country's first climate chief, who was recently profiled, and we've been out with a number of initiatives in just the last 14 months alone, including making sure that voices of young people are represented in policy making and decision making. It's also why I included in our economic development bill a proposal to make Massachusetts the hub of climate tech, a $1 billion proposal to lean into climate tech. I think that we can have the effect on climate tech here in Massachusetts that we've had on life sciences. So much of the innovation, the technology, the research and development that is helping us power away from fossil fuels to renewables is happening right here in Massachusetts. And we need to seize that opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to really advance and own this critically important sector.
Thank you, Jerome, very much for your call.
You know, Governor, there's been some confusion about what's going on with this month limit on people that are staying in overflow shelters in Massachusetts. What's going on?
Well, I've said for a long time that we're at capacity and that we simply cannot sustainably continue to house the numbers that we're seeing come into Massachusetts. I commend all of our partners in government, outside of government, and community, the faith community, and service providers who have worked to house our new arrivals and migrant families here. I also have stressed the importance of work authorizations. I'm proud of the work that we've done to have over 3,000 people processed at this point for work authorizations. They've received permits or are in the process of receiving permits and getting plugged in with employers to fill needed jobs. But I continue to call on Congress to act. And, you know, it is outrageous that we as states are having to bear the burden of this, bear the cost, bear the strain, simply because Congress has failed to act. What I did yesterday is announce that when it comes to these overflow sites, and we have a few of them, that we are going to require people, families, to certify that after 30 days, they've fulfilled the requirements that we ask of them if they're coming into the system. Specifically, that they engage with case managers, they seek ESL lessons, they seek work, including applications for work authorizations. We need to have these kinds of requirements imposed and guardrails so that we're more quickly able to get people on the right track and hopefully, Margery, diverted from longer-term emergency shelter stays, which, as you know, are already above capacity. I put a cap on that a while back at 7,500. It remains the case that approximately 55% of the families who are in our emergency shelter system statewide are Massachusetts families. But 45% are now, and increasing, are now migrant families. So we've got to find a way to deal with this capacity constraint, which is also a fiscal restraint, which is why you also heard yesterday the Senate President, the Speaker, and I speak in a unified way about the need to bring some constraints around this, because we continue to face the situation that we're getting zero relief from the federal government, we're getting zero relief from Congress, and so we have to find a way to navigate this here.
Just one thing I don't understand, though. If you are not in the country with papers or you're here illegally, some people cannot work. Isn't that one of the big problems here?
We're talking about people here who are migrants mostly right now, who are in our overflow sites, which is different from the emergency shelter operations, the 7,500 families around the state. We're talking about people who we've got in overflow sites. They are mostly migrant families. The migrants
who
are
can
here.
Work.
Well, they can, because they were lawfully allowed into the country by the federal government, which has been my cry from the beginning. If you're allowing people in lawfully, legally, then let them work. And we did get the Biden administration to come and work with us on the ground to process 3,000 people plus for work authorizations to get them into jobs that need to be filled and on to self-sufficiency.
We're talking to the governor of the Commonwealth, and you are talking to her, too, for the rest of this hour. 877, well, the lines are full, but you can text 877-301-8970. Before we take the next call, let's go to what I'm sure is your favorite topic, Puerto Rico, if we can, for a second. A couple of things, Governor. On Monday, I think I have the days right, but I may be off a day or two. On Monday, you said your private life is your private life, and you won't disclose in certain circumstances where you've been even after the fact. On Friday, you changed your position, and you did disclose that your partner had taken you to Puerto Rico for your birthday for 4 days. That's one question. What changed? That's one. And two, I think the first show you were with us as governor, you talked about how you'd be the most transparent governor. In that trip, not only did we not know after the fact where you went, we didn't know until the Secretary of State said he was the acting governor that you were even out of state. Isn't that the minimum thing that the people of the Commonwealth should be entitled to know if their governor or the lieutenant governor or the Secretary of State is running the show?
Well, Jim, what I've said from the beginning is that I'll work to provide as much information as possible, balancing the needs of security and privacy, which are very real in this day and age. I have said, and I have kept up with producing my calendar each month, which is something that I don't believe any other governor has done. So that's more transparency. I've also said, though, when it comes to out-of-state travel for work, and I am taking out-of-state trips to D.C., meetings with other governors and the like, to do the work that a governor needs to do, that I will disclose that after. And that is for security reasons. And certainly I'll do that for personal travel. I honestly, it was really nice. My girlfriend took me away for my birthday for the weekend. I didn't think it was a big deal because, we have that covered in terms of the running of the government. And I'm obviously always working no matter where I am. But I basically just decided that I didn't want there to be any more further concern about, where I was. I did get to go to Puerto Rico for a couple of days. That was very lovely. It was the first time we've been away and since I became governor alone together. So that was nice. But going forward, to be clear, I'll make sure that people know where I've been once I return.
But let me be clear, but going forward as well, when you leave the state, when you're leaving the state, will we know that you're not here and that somebody else is in charge?
You'll know after the fact.
After the fact.
Yep. Which is consistent with the way a number of governors operate and appropriate in terms of what I've been advised in terms of security. So people will know, and trust me, no matter where I am working to make sure that things are where they need to be in our state.
Governor, I know there were a few times when people were protesting outside Charlie Baker's house up in Scituate, and I know you've had these white supremacist neo-Nazi people. They were just there briefly when you were in Puerto Rico. So is your sense from the state cops or whoever advises you on this that the security issues you're facing are more dire, either because we are getting very popular with these neo-Nazi groups, and also you're the first openly gay governor. Either of those things factor into the security concerns of your security people?
I'm not going to talk about the specifics of my security because of security, but I think that people know it's just a day and age where I think any of us in these positions, as you look around the country, it's responsible to take whatever steps are necessary.
We're talking to the governor of the Commonwealth, and James in Uxbridge, you are now talking to the governor of the Commonwealth. Hey there, James.
Good morning, Jim. Good morning, Margery. Good morning, Governor. How are you all?
Good.
Fine, thanks.
Hi, James.
So my wife, Rebecca, and I recently became grandparents for the first time.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Vivian is very healthy. Her mother is searching the family child care database online at the early childhood pages. And she was surprised to learn that gun ownership is not a mandatory part of the listing. She has to voluntarily uncover that with the providers. So I'm wondering, is that a change that could be made to the online listings?
Well, James, first off, congratulations to you and to your family on baby Vivian. That's awesome. And second, I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure about it. But I will say this: childcare is a huge issue, and it's why we've made investments and will continue to make investments in childcare and make sure that we are doing all that we can. We just proposed last year and got in the budget, and we proposed once again historic levels of funding in childcare, which we know is desperately needed in Uxbridge and around the state. But thanks for the call, James. I'll follow up with the team.
James, speaking of, thank you for the call. Speaking of follow-up and speaking of transparency, I see the person at the mic we actually met a few weeks ago, David Scott, is here with his son, Michael. David was one of the people featured in the story, Governor, just to give you some background, by our colleague, Jennifer Moore, who reported on loved ones having people who lived and died in state institutions for people with disabilities and how impossible it is to get family records. And if I remember correctly, David, please correct me if I'm wrong, your brother had spina bifida as a baby, was taken away to Fernald. 51 years later, he died, and then 51 years later, now, you're still unable to get records. So whatever you have for the governor, please share it. David Scott.
Well, first of all, good morning, Governor, and thank you for listening to my concerns.
Good morning, David.
I am trying to gain the records for my brother. I was 7 years old when he passed away. You know of the atrocities that occurred at that school and, you know, what my parents had to endure by having him taken away. And the whole thing is just, it's really affected me, especially with my son, being born with cerebral palsy himself. It's really empowered me even more now in this day and age to try to do more about it. And every time I try to gain access through his records, through Galvin's office, through anybody, they slam the door in my face. They tell me no. Those records were left in that school when they closed for all the vandals to get a hold about. The vandals know more about my brother than I do. The state lags behind. We are last in the whole country for opening records like that. Last.
What's your question, David, for the governor, if I may?
Would you please, I understand that you have the power to sign an executive order to have these records open. And I ask you to please, for my brother and for a lot of other families' sake, to please, it has to go through you. That's the only way this is going to get done, Governor, honestly. And in your heart, I believe you will do it. And when you do, I would ask you if you could name a John's Law in memory of my brother.
Thank you, David. And I'll promise you this. I'm going to look into it, and whatever I can do, I understand we're talking about events that happened a long, long time ago, and it doesn't make sense to me that we wouldn't make that available, whoever the we is. Because honestly, there's been some discussion there about, you know, state, city, what have you, right? So let's do this. Let's sit down and talk together offline with my team, David, and see what we can do, because I want you to have closure. I want you to have peace, both in John's memory and in for your own self and your son, who I'm looking at. What's his name?
Michael.
Michael. Hi, Michael. So let's do that, okay?
I really appreciate it, and I think you're doing a great job. I know you have a lot of things to balance, and I think you're doing a great job.
Well, appreciate it. Thank
You're
you, David.
welcome.
And David,
Thank you.
David, you're doing a great job too, by the way. Michael and David, it's really good to see you both.
You know,
Thank
I just
you.
had Charlie Baker
Thank
in
you.
Situate. I don't know why I said that. He was in Swampscott, not Situate. A lot of people are asking about this bridge incident, and it was a ship that hit the pilings of the bridge. It was, I hope, a unique situation, not to do with the structure of the bridge. But a lot of people are asking. You mentioned the Tobin Bridge having been inspected a couple of months ago. What is the deal about inspecting bridges? Is it just a regular thing, and how regular?
It's a regularly occurring thing that our bridges are inspected. And as I said, the Tobin was inspected a couple of months ago. If on inspection we identify any issues, we would work hard to take care of that. And we'll continue to do that. We're going to learn more about what happened in Baltimore. It's devastating. It's shocking. I mean, you know, we've all seen the image now of the immediate collapse on impact that you know, ship had. And so, you know, we'll learn more about it. I know it's high tide, which in full moon, and you know, we don't know if there was a mechanical issue. And remember, these are massive.
Massive.
So even if you lose power, like the momentum of these massive ships, you're not going to be able to control that. But we don't know what happened. But it's devastating. It's devastating for Baltimore. It's devastating for Maryland. And certainly we want to make sure that we have the very best protocols in place. Our inspections are up to date. And as I say, if we identify any issues, we're going to address them. I will say, you know, when you think about bridges, Cape Cod bridges have been the subject of a lot of discussion, and it's why I set up that federal funds office, and we've been really chasing federal dollars to get those Cape Cod bridges to where they need to be, and they need to be replaced. And to me, it just underscores how important that is. We've recently had success. And we're hopeful that in terms of getting money for the Cape Cod bridges.
350? Is that 350 or
well,
something?
Most recently is 350 from the Army Corps. We got close to another $400 million the other day in a federal grant towards this. And we're waiting on an application for about $1 billion for the rest of that. And that's really important. But it's why I've been focused on this. It's why because infrastructure, state of good repair, it's really, really important. And we just haven't done it for too long.
I know I'm speaking for Margery. Every time we drive over the Sagamore Bridge, we're a little nervous. Are you? Truthfully.
No, I mean, it is, I'll tell you, Sagamore Bridge has been inspected, and it has been labeled structurally deficient, which is why we want the bridges replaced. That said, structurally deficient doesn't mean unsafe, because what happens is when there is that designation, there was work immediately done to ensure safe passage. But it doesn't take away from the fact that we actually need to have these bridges replaced. And our strategy this year was to go hard after first the Sagamore Bridge replacement. We've had success in receiving grants towards that, and also through the budget, and we're going to continue to pursue that work.
Before we take a 1-minute break, I can't believe I'm asking you this question, but are you contemplating following the lead of Ron DeSantis on one thing in particular? DeSantis, I know he's one of your favorite governors, and ours, I should say. He recently signed a bill that bans under 14-year-olds from social media. 14 and 15-year-olds need parental consent. And I remember, I hope I get this right, I remember talking to you, actually, as Attorney General a couple of years ago, when you were concerned, maybe it was after that Frances, whatever her name was, from Facebook testified in front of Congress about the mental and physical harm that a lot of these social media platforms do, particularly young girls and women. Is something like that on your radar, like the DeSantis thing?
Well, I'll tell you, the reason that I opened, as Attorney General, an investigation into social media companies. We joined together other AGs, actually Democrat and Republican, is we opened this investigation. It is ongoing through the efforts of AG Campbell and her office, is because social media, we know, has demonstrable harm for our young people. The addictive nature of it, the mental health issues that it creates, it's documented now, it's well known, and we need to take action. Whether legislation is the appropriate course, I'm not sure. I see the talk about banning TikTok and the like. I just really would hope and encourage that just culturally as a society that we could back up parents, that we could back up our young people who actually, if you talk to many of them, they don't want to be so tied to their phones. But they feel like if they're not tied to their phones, they're missing out. Everyone else is doing it, and no kid wants to feel that way. But this stuff is bad, and I always am struck, Jim, by the fact that you listen to the interviews of all the tech founders and entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, the people who actually build this stuff, and they say they don't let their children use social media. So why should ours be harmed or hurt by it? You know, it just really is galling to me.
So is that at least a possibility here?
I don't know. As I say, you know, I think it's about, in the first instance, let's educate, let's try to change the culture around some of this, and I'm open to, I'm open to whatever policy changes make sense in this space.
That's the voice of Governor Maura Healey. She'll be with us till the top of the hour. You're listening to 89.7 GBH.
It's bad for adults, too, sometimes. I mean, right? I mean,
yes.
Who isn't out there checking their phone?
Constant.
And, you know, right? So we could all do a better job.
Yeah, we're setting a bad example. Anyway, if you want to try to reach the governor, the phone number, 877-301-8970. That's the number to text or call. We'll try to get to as many as we can before the top of the hour. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Margery, Eagan, and Jim Braude. We're live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Back here tomorrow and Friday. And with us for the rest of the hour is the Governor of the Commonwealth to take your questions and calls. Phone lines are full, but texts are always open, 877-301-8970.
Governor, under the Baker administration, he pushed this idea that housing around T-stops, zoning needed to be changed so that it would enable cities and towns to build more housing to ease the housing crunch. What's happening with the MBTA, so-called Commuter Act, and arguments aren't going to be heard until the fall, I think. So what is the latest? And what's happening with Milton?
Well, here's what's happening. Housing is the number one issue for our state. I don't know, everybody listening, I'm sure, has a story to tell about housing. You've got kids who are back living with you because they can't afford rent, they can't afford to buy a place. We have people who are seniors who can't afford to downsize right now because they can't afford another home in Massachusetts, and that's lousy, especially for grandparents who want to remain close to their grandkids. We've got employers who can't expand here, or other companies who won't come here because they can't recruit talent because the cost of housing. This is real stuff. I gave a speech a couple weeks ago. An executive search firm came up to me after, they're in the life sciences space, and they said, Governor, I'm so glad you talked about housing because it is the number one issue we hear about. And if you can't find housing for people earning six figures, that's a problem. It hurts us competitively. So that's why I went big with a housing bond bill, $4 billion to incent housing development statewide. There's also the MBTA Communities Act, which was a law passed nearly unanimously a few years ago, signed into law by Governor Baker, that basically says to communities around transit hubs, you need to rezone to allow for more housing and multifamily housing. And the good news is nearly all of the communities subject to that law have complied. Of course, we ran into an issue recently with Milton, and now that's the subject of litigation. Our administration is going to continue to work with Milton on its plan to comply. But in the meantime, we're going ahead and we're working with other communities who understand this, that more housing is good for their communities. It's good for building vibrancy and for economic growth and development in our state. And it's something that we absolutely have to do. All communities can benefit, and no one single city or town in Massachusetts, in our great state, is going to be able to solve the housing crisis, the housing challenge. We all have to work together.
So are you guys, with this oral argument, or whatever it is, not till the fall, which another example, I would argue the court should move more expeditiously, but are you talking to Milton? Their selectmen approved this. It was only the citizenry that, not only, it was the citizenry that said no. Are there discussions going on to see if
absolutely. So the Attorney General has filed suit. That case will proceed later. Separately, our administration continues to work with Milton. We actually gave them $60,000 in funding to work through some of the technical issues on their plan so that they could get to a place that satisfied everybody in town. We're going to continue to be at the table working with Milton, working with other communities. We need housing in this state. Jim, the numbers are real. It's estimated that we are short 200,000 housing units in this state. That is so much housing that we're down, which is why we need to do things like allow communities to have accessory dwelling units, use garages, use attached buildings.
That's your granny flat, Margery.
I wasn't going to say granny flat.
That's where I'm going.
This is a surefire way, proven around the country.
Yes.
To increase housing units overnight. And so, everything's got to be on the table. We really need to come together. We really need to get this done. And we really need this affordable homes bond bill to pass.
Two quick things. One, are you convinced that, are you worried, I should say first, that other communities are going to use this time while the case is pending before the state's highest court and opt out themselves? And number two, are you convinced the legislature, which often doesn't complete its work before its 5-month vacation, are you convinced you're going to get a vote on this before July?
Well, I certainly hope that we don't see communities try to fight this. As I say, the good news is nearly all communities have complied because I think they understand the imperative here. Also, certainly we're going to continue to work with the legislature to try to get something done, knowing how important it is. I also just want to say there's been a lot of misinformation about this MBTA Communities Act. It doesn't actually require you to build.
Yes,
there's nothing to be, there's no, this idea that you're going to see huge increases in the student population and what have you, no. That's not what's happening here with the MBTA Communities Act. And again, I didn't author it, I didn't sign it, I support it. It just requires rezoning, right? Let's go look at our communities. How can we rezone so that there's more housing? For those who care about climate, it's a good thing to have more housing located next to transit hubs so that people don't actually have to drive to work, right? It's a good thing if you can, have a population back in your city or town that's going to contribute to economic growth and development. And I'm just telling you, the reality is the reason that people are locating to other places, again, listeners out there know this from their own lives, is because of the high cost of housing. That shouldn't be a reason people leave our great state.
Okay, Christina in Dorchester. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to mention one thing that's such interest in this bridge. The New York Times just reporting that that cargo ship lost power, sent a Mayday call, and workers were trying to stop traffic before people went over the bridge, but it obviously didn't stop at all.
Christina in Dorchester, you're on with Governor Healey. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure, yes.
Hi. So my question relates to the recent appointment of Melissa Lavingston to oversee the decarbonization of communities across Massachusetts. And my question is really related to the idea of consistent policy for decarbonization. And specifically, I'm curious about how this new appointment is consistent with the fact that the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection is currently allowing the expansion of gas pipelines and related infrastructure in Massachusetts, and particularly Project Maple and the Weymouth compressor station, whose sole purpose is to make frack gas from Pennsylvania possible to export to other countries and not even be used in Massachusetts.
Christina,
and I understand that children...
We need a question, Christina. We need a question for the governor.
So children in Weymouth and Quincy are breathing carcinogens emitted by the compressor station. And if current environmental justice
We need a question, Christina. I'm sorry. We just don't have time for a statement. We need a question, please.
Allowed to operate. So my question is, how is this really consistent with your pro-energy transition stance when you're allowing Project Maple pipeline expansion and the compressor station to continue to operate?
We got it. Christina, thank you.
In terms of the Weymouth compressor, and I know it's come up again and again for your listening audience, that matter remains on appeal. Let me tell you where we are with the clean energy revolution. There's a reason I went big on our economic development bill. I want to make Massachusetts the global hub for climate tech. All the innovation that's going to power us away from fossil fuels to our renewables future. Also, this week, my office will be receiving the bids for the largest offshore wind development proposal ever, 3,600 megawatts. We're really excited about that. I'm also excited about the fact that we have now received from the Biden administration tax credits that support all of the industries related to offshore wind. That's super, super important. It's going to be a game changer. I met with Secretary Yellen to advocate for that myself, and that's going to be a big deal to allowing and incenting more offshore wind development. What the caller was asking about is an appointment of somebody who I think is critically important to all this. You see, we're not going to meet our mandates, our goals, unless we find a way to deal with transmission, to bring that wind that's offshore, onshore, to get to homes and to businesses. And that involves a lot of work around transmission lines, the grid, substation. So you got to have, I thought, in order to do that, let's have somebody who's really focused on that, somebody who's really focused on working with utilities, working with communities, working with the workforce too, right, that needs to be trained and on board with getting this work done. Otherwise, we're not going to meet our mandates. So I'm very proud of that appointment and proud of the work that the team is doing around decarbonization in particular, whether it's looking at EVs and what we need to do around charging, whether it's looking at how we're going to build out the infrastructure to be able to deliver the renewables, whether we're talking about solar or wind or hydro. Everything's got to be on the table.
Hannah, do you want me to ask the question for the Maryland?
Hold on for 1 second,
sorry.
though. What about the Weymouth compressor station?
Oh, as I said, it's under appeal. Remains under appeal. Yeah.
Okay.
Marilyn, who is here, can't come to the mic. She says, how can the ride, meaning the MBTA ride, return to reliable service? She waited 5 hours recently for her pre-scheduled ride. That's Marilyn, who's in the audience.
Hi, Marilyn. Let me follow up with GMA. Okay.
Fair enough. Marilyn, give your contact information. Is it okay to take her contact information?
Oh, of course.
And the governor's office will be in touch. Governor,
But
can
I
I
just
ask you
want to be clear on one
sorry.
thing, though, because these people are relentless in our phone calls and our text messages. They're very upset, understandably, about the Weymouth compressor station. So I know it's under appeal, as you just said. But is this something that you have an opinion on, or is it something that your new person is going to look into deeply?
That new
Where are you?
person has nothing to do with,
Okay.
with this. As I say, it's under appeal, and I'm going to let the authority there decide the issue and what needs to happen. What I am very much focused on, though, is, if we truly want to meet our goals, if we truly, those out there who care about climate, you need to get involved in community. You see some of what's happening right now as we talk about offshore wind coming onshore and communities that don't want to see certain things cited, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get there if something is just on paper as a goal. You have to get there doing the nitty-gritty work. It's also why not only did I put somebody in charge of decarbonization and infrastructure, but I also set up a commission on permitting and regulating. They're going to get me recommendations, I think this month, that's going to speak to what do we actually need to do concretely to speed up the permitting and siting of the infrastructure that I'm talking about that's going to enable us to deliver and distribute renewables.
Governor, before we get back to the calls, last month we talked to you about the Steward healthcare debacle and including some of the things Brian Margery wrote about with the insane, obscene compensation for the CEO. There was a long story in the Globe that went back and looked at the history of regulation and oversight. And while it did fault some individuals in positions of power, the primary takeaway for me, and I'm wondering if it was for you as governor, was that the appropriate bodies, whether it's the Attorney General, regulatory authorities, don't have the statutory power to do the job that needs to be done with a private equity entity like this. And if you agree with that, this again, I never understand this. If that's true, is the legislature dropping almost everything? And this is what, 200,000 people we're talking about? How many people are in the workforce there? How many?
16,000.
60. I mean, how many patients? 200,000. Isn't it 160 or something?
Yeah, there's a number, and it also speaks to the stability of the healthcare system.
Do you agree
here.
with the Globe's conclusion that there's statutory power lacking? And if you do, is the legislature doing anything about it?
Yeah, I mean, the legislature just this week held hearings on it. And, it's a terrible problem. It's terrible what Steward did. It's terrible what its CEO did. And, you've seen just like, it reminds me a little bit of what I saw when I went up against the Sacklers in Purdue in terms of the greed and the avarice and just, that's what happened here, to be clear. And we're paying a price for it as a state. I'm very grateful to my Secretary of Health and Human Services, who has been working with providers, working on ensuring the stability of the network. My goal is to protect jobs, to protect patients, to protect the stability of the system. When it comes to legislation, that's something the legislature is having hearings on. We testified yesterday, somebody from our administration, about that, and I certainly support any and all efforts to prevent the kind of situation that we are seeing with Steward. It's also the case that Steward, my view was that they were required to produce financial information a long time ago. They refused, and they actually took me to court as Attorney General years ago to try to get an order that they weren't weren't required to produce that information. We won, actually, and then they appealed it, so it's on appeal. But yeah, I think that the legislature should be looking at everything here, and anything that we can do to prevent a future scenario or situation like Steward, we should do.
Lou in Norwood, you're on with the governor.
Hi, thank you.
Sure, thank you.
It's a pleasure to be on. I have great admiration for the governor, and I listen to this station and you and Margery, Jim, every day.
Very kind,
Thank
Lou.
you.
What's your question for the governor?
Well, it's about her statement about the MCAS, why she said she was against it. She said, and I'm quoting, "I think that assessment is important. We all agree on that. We need to be able to assess how our young people are doing. So I do not support getting rid of MCAS."
Getting rid of
And
MCAS the issue is as a graduation requirement, which is a ballot question.
Correct.
Come this fall. Okay.
Right.
So what do you want to know, Lou?
But the ballot question would not get rid of MCAS.
Correct.
Right.
We'd still be able to assess students.
Right. So what's your question?
So I was puzzled by what the governor said, and she also said there are about 700 students each year who are unable to pass the MCAS, but it's not just the 700.
Well, Lou, why don't we,
Students who fail
Lou, rather than you characterizing what the governor's position is, why doesn't she explain what it is? And thank you much for your call. Governor?
Yeah, thanks, Lou, for calling. Look, I'm the daughter of educators. My mom was a health teacher and a school nurse. My stepdad was a high school history teacher. By the way, president of his teachers union locally. I've always supported educators and also supported everything that we can do as a state to support our students. Massachusetts, we're home to the first public school in the country, first public library, right? We have education enshrined in our Constitution. This is really important for who we are as a state, and we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to do right by our young people. In terms of MCAS, what I've said is that I think MCAS is important as an assessment tool, and that we have some uniform standard that we want to make sure all of our young people are meeting. If the ballot question goes the other way, we're going to have a situation where it's up to 351 different cities and towns to have that assessment standard. I don't think that makes sense for who we are as a state. When it comes to the graduation requirement, we looked at the numbers, and there are about 700 students a year who are unable to receive a high school diploma because they did not pass MCAS. I want for every single one of those 700 students. And my job and the job that we are trying to do now is look at what do we need to do to make sure those students get their diplomas. That's the work that we need to do. I don't think it makes sense to get rid of this important assessment tool.
One of the things that I don't understand making sense either, in the story the other day, I think it was in the Globe, commenting upon your decision that you will oppose the ballot question, there's a quote from your Secretary of Education saying something like, if this thing were to pass, we have 351 cities and towns, what do we do? And we asked Paul Reville, the former Secretary of Education, he thought his response was the right thing. My attitude is, if there's a chance that come January, it'll be removed as an education requirement, why is your education secretary not preparing for that possibility? It's almost like throwing up his hands saying, well, if it passes, we're really
I don't
screwed.
think it will pass. I don't think it will pass.
Well, what if it does pass?
No, I mean, look, we are right now focused on what do we need to do right now to support our students and our educators. One example, a few weeks ago, I announced a whole literacy initiative because Massachusetts right now is behind some other states when it comes to teaching kids how to read, right? Too many of our districts are using long debunked curricula when it comes to literacy. And, we need to get back to making sure that every district is using the science of reading, using phonics, teaching what is well-proven methods for our young people to be able to read and to read well. It breaks my heart when I look at literacy levels in some places in the state. And so, that's an example of what my terrific Secretary of Education is doing in terms of new initiatives, new innovations. Let's make sure that our young people are given the very best tools to succeed. Also, as part of that effort, we're putting money into professional development to work directly with educators and teachers on support for what they need to be teaching and delivering the kind of curricula that makes sense.
I want to make just one more quick try.
Hold on. We just stop here for just a second. Point out, you may not be aware, Governor Healey, that Jim
won let's not do this.
Award from the Massachusetts Teachers Association.
She was endorsed by the Massachusetts Teachers.
And I want to point out that the Massachusetts Teachers Association misrepresented the number of kids who can't graduate because of the MCAS. It is 700, but most of those 700 did not do their schoolwork or show up in school, so it wasn't just the MCAS, it was that. And also that Max Pages, the head of the MTA, initially was not in favor of changing the literacy requirements, which has left 40% of third graders unable to read at levels
what are you doing, like an editorial or something?
I just want to point this out so the governor knows where you stand on these issues.
If I
on
may,
the wrong side, I would say.
Can I get back? Even if you believe it's not going to pass, I'm going to take one more try at this. If there was a tax cut on the ballot, and you said, I don't think it's going to pass, I'm assuming you'd say to your A&F people, prepare for the worst. This may pass, so we know what to do. If it does, I find it hard to believe, I guess, that your secretary, who I've heard great things about, we haven't had him on yet, and we should, is not preparing for a loss. I mean,
this is an interesting discussion. Jim, you're asking him to prepare for a loss where he has absolutely no power. So what's the action plan supposed to be when he's got no power? That's why we need to make sure. No, but that's why we need to make sure that we have some basic standards in place, And also what I've said when it comes to MCAS is we should be willing to look at ourselves and what it is we're measuring. What we measured 15 years ago, 25 years ago may not be what and how we should measure things today. But we need that assessment, and we need that commonality. I don't think it makes sense that we have 351 cities and towns with a different way of, and also forcing them to administer some sort of, putting them in a position of having to come up with something. So, look, I think bottom line, this is about how do we support our schools, how do we support our young people, right? And how do we support our educators? And
that's right, Jim.
I think we get there. I'm also proud of the fact that we have made historic investments. As governor, I have made, through my team, historic investments, and thank you to the legislature, in education, K to 12. We're going to continue to double down on that. As I say, Massachusetts, we are an education state, and we need to make sure we're doing everything we can by our young people.
Rachel and Newton, you literally have 15 seconds for your question, so please make it tight. Go ahead, Rachel.
Hi, Governor. Thank you. I'll make it quick. I'll have to expedite it. The question is, DeSantis plans on bringing more immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, Governor. What are you going to do to cut him off at the path? Don't give him the satisfaction of doing it. So please, I hope you have a plan, and what is it?
Thank you, Rachel.
I think, Rachel, there's a lot of people who want to politicize this. See comments by Governor DeSantis. See comments by candidates running to be governor. And what I've said is I'm not going to play politics here. This is about a need, an imperative for Congress to act. If Republican politicians want to call somebody or call out somebody, call Republicans in Congress and tell them to pass the bipartisan deal that should have been passed that would have resolved this a long time ago, including getting funding to states like Massachusetts are having to bear the cost of this. So I'm focused on getting people housed, getting people working, right? And, continuing to call on Congress to act.
So last week, we only have 30 seconds. Meredith Goldstein from Love Letters was on right before the release of this fabulous podcast with you and your partner, Joanna Lidgate, in which you talked about the importance of music in your life. And we want to know, when you said that your first concert you ever attended was Kool and the Gang, did you do polling and find out you lost support, Governor? That's what
I'm sure I lost support. That's what honesty gets you. I didn't think that one through. I was a little kid. I was excited. I went with an older girl and her family to a Boston Common concert.
How was that concert?
Don't remember it.
Okay.
Don't remember.
They're apparently still playing, though.
Okay. Governor Healey, thank you very much for being with us. Really
Thank you.
appreciate
Good to
it.
see
We're
you,
sorry
Governor.
we did not get to all the texts and the calls. We did the best we could.